The sky above Cadia was not a sky at all. It was a wound. The eye of terror gaped wide, its seething clouds of warp fire bleeding into the void, casting the fortress world in perpetual twilight. From horizon to horizon, the heavens were a swirling bruise of crimson and gold, as if the stars themselves had been set ablaze and then drowned in blood. Every child of Cadia was born beneath this sky. Every soldier died beneath it. And now, for the first time in 10 millennia, it seemed to be watching back. They said Cadia could not fall, that the fortress stood eternal, that the Cadian gate would never break. But fortresses are not immortal, and neither are those who guard them. And so begins the tale of how the Imperium's shield cracked, how the enemy came not only from beyond the eye, but from within our own walls. Before we begin, you should know something. We truly love and care for you, our listener, across all the stars and centuries. This story is yours as much as it is ours. Before we march into the fires of Cadia's last stand, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, and let's begin. It was the 13th year of the 13th Crusade. Lord Castellan Ursarkar Creed stood upon the command balcony of Casa Partox, a fortress whose walls had never been breached. Snow hissed against the glass like static from some ancient Vox transmission, melting instantly against the glow of the lumen strips. The war map below him was a shifting constellation of red and green icons, each blinking at a tempo that could drive a man to madness. Beyond the walls, the storm-shrouded plains stretched toward the obsidian spires of the pylons, ancient monoliths older than mankind, humming with energies that kept the raw madness of the eye at bay. Creed's eyes, sharp yet shadowed by fatigue, traced the lines of the coming war. Intelligence suggested that the enemy fleets gathering beyond the gate were the largest since the heresy itself. But that wasn't what kept him awake. No, the thing that haunted him was the silence. For months now, his scouts had reported no signs of chaos advance along several critical approach vectors. Entire enemy divisions had simply vanished from Auspec's range. Such absence was not a mercy. It was bait. He could feel it, deep in his bones. Cadia's defenses were a dam against an ocean, and somewhere beneath the surface, the stone was cracking. He turned as a door hissed open behind him. Colonel Kell entered, his uniform still dusted with frost, his face pale from the cold outside. Reports from Casa Craft, sir. The Northern Defense Grid's relay towers went dark again. Tech priests say it's a systems fault, but... Kell trailed off. Creed finished for him. But the same towers went offline during the last infiltration attempt. Yes, sir. A low hum reverberated through the fortress, not from the machines, but from the air itself. Outside, the warp shimmered unnaturally. In the distance, beyond the pylons, one of the stars seemed to flicker and then vanish entirely. Creed's jaw tightened. He had heard of this omen before. The veterans of the First Black Crusade spoke of it in hushed tones. The eye blinks before it strikes. The rest of the day passed in uneasy routine. Briefings, deployment orders, ration audits. Yet through it all, the image of that disappearing star remained with him. It felt less like an astronomical event and more like an executioner sharpening his blade. That night, as the fortress lights dimmed and Cadia's false dawn horizon bled red from the eye's glow, Creed stood alone in the command room. His breath misted in the cold air. In the silence, he let himself ask the question he could never voice before others. What if the fortress falls? The hum from the pylons outside rose to a low, keening wail. as if the world itself had heard and chosen not to answer. The fortress world of Cadia was born in blood, and its history was written in the ink of war. 10,000 years of vigilance had forged its people into a weapon sharper than any blade and harder than any fortress wall. But weapons wear down, steel dulls, and soldiers die, and sometimes the rot begins long before the final blow. Centuries before Creed's watch, in the shadow of the First Black Crusade, there was a man whose name is now forbidden in Cadian records, an inquisitor of the Ordo Malleus, garbed in black carapace, whose seal bore the sigil of the Emperor's will. His mission, to trap Abaddon the Despoiler and end his threat forever. His method, to let a world burn. The planet was called Eryxis Prime, a bastion in the gate's outer reaches, a shield world like Cadia herself. Its orbital bastions were manned by 100,000 troops, its ground armies drilled to perfection. But the Inquisitor saw something more, a lure. If Eryxis fell, Abaddon would be drawn deeper into Imperial territory, overextending himself, vulnerable to encirclement. And so, when the War Master's fleets descended, the Inquisitor recalled the Navy, cut the astropathic lines, and ordered the planetary defense forces to hold without aid. They did, for 43 days. On the 44th, the skies turned black, and the surface burned. 3 billion souls died, men, women, and children, who believed salvation was coming. No fleet ever came. The trap failed. Abaddon did not overextend. He broke through, the fires of Eryxis still burning behind him, and pushed toward Cadia. Only desperate reinforcements from Segmentum Obscurus halted him, at a cost that could not be counted. Eryxis was lost forever. The Inquisitor vanished into the warp lanes of imperial bureaucracy. His name, records, and rank were purged, but his bloodline endured, hidden in the labyrinth of the Inquisition, passing its secrets like a hereditary curse. Some claimed his descendants still sat on the Ordo Malleus's secret councils, shaping wars from the shadows. Others whispered that they had learned the true lesson of Eryxis, not that sacrifice was tragic, but that it was useful. These whispers reached Creed only in fragments. Official histories spoke of strategic necessity, never treachery. Yet veterans from the Cadian Eighth, who had fought alongside Eryxis survivors, told a different story. They described evac ships ordered to stand idle in orbit until the enemy was upon them, of vox silence enforced by imperial decree, of distress signals deliberately jammed. Now, in the cold halls of Casa Partox, Creed found himself staring at a fragment of that history. The intelligence report had arrived sealed under the cipher of the Ordo Hereticus, meant for his eyes alone. The data slates were old, dusty, their machine spirits sluggish. When he coaxed them awake, they told of pattern similarities between Eryxis and the enemy's current deployments. Sectors left open like bait, silence where there should be movement, the sense of being invited to commit. Kell found him in the war room hours later, hunched over the flickering hololith. "You've been reading the ghosts again," the colonel said, his voice low. "History's not ghosts," Creed muttered. "It's a knife someone left in your back 100 years ago, and you're still bleeding from it." Kell frowned, but said nothing. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing. Snow spiraled over the battlements, dusting the barrels of Lascannons and the shoulders of silent sentinels. Somewhere in the distance, a deep, resonant thud shook the earth. A training exercise, or so the Vox claimed. But Creed could not shake the feeling that Cadia was already in the trap, and that the jaws had been closing for years. The records of Eryxis had been buried, the Inquisitor's betrayal erased from history. If the same hands were moving now, they would not make the same mistake twice. Late that night, when the fortress was quiet and the pylon fields shimmered with green light, Creed looked again to the Eye of Terror. In the roiling storm beyond, he fancied he saw shapes, vast, indistinct, watching. Not ships, not even demons, just witnesses, the kind who had seen this play before. He turned away, but the thought followed him into his dreams. What if Cadia's end had been written before the first shot was ever fired? Casa Partox had always felt like the heart of Cadia, a place where every corridor hummed with discipline, where orders carried the weight of law, and where the walls themselves seemed to breathe vigilance. But in the winter of the 13th Crusade, its heart began to skip beats. It started with whispers. Officers who had served together for decades began speaking in closed-door meetings, breaking protocol. Vox messages were cut mid-transmission, replaced by static. Supply trains vanished en route between casas. Their crews later found wandering the snowfields, alive, but with no memory of how they'd gotten there. And somewhere deep in the fortress, someone was tampering with the war room data archives. Lord Castellan Ursarkar Creed felt the weight of it more than most. He had spent a lifetime mastering the art of anticipating the enemy, but now the enemy seemed to be standing behind him. His instinct told him this was no simple infiltration. It was an infection, one that was already spreading. The first break in the chain of trust came in the mess hall of the 143rd Cadian. Two captains, both decorated veterans, erupted into a shouting match that quickly escalated to drawn sidearms. One accused the other of altering troop deployment orders in the latest drills, moving units away from the pylon fields without approval. The accused denied it, but the order bore his seal, his voice print, and his signature. He swore it was a forgery. Witnesses said the lights flickered just before the document was accessed in the archive cogitator. The incident was written up as administrative error. Creed knew better. Colonel Kell brought him the next piece. "Sir, the relay towers at the northern defense grid, they didn't just fail." Kell laid a bent strip of metal on Creed's desk. It was the size of a man's finger, etched with curling runes. "Mechanicus says it's no part of their design." "Chaos taint?" Creed asked, though he already suspected the answer. Kell shook his head grimly. "Too clean, too deliberate. This was meant to be found, sir, like a warning." They moved quietly, setting up an internal watch unit, men and women whose loyalty was beyond question. But even that circle felt fragile. One of their number, Lieutenant Arvid, failed to report for duty 2 nights later. His body was found at the base of the fortress wall, neck broken. The sentry log showed no one approaching the area, no vox chatter, no alarms. His own sidearm was missing. By now, the Cadian regiments were restless. Soldiers trained for war, but war was always meant to come from out there. Now they watched each other across barracks and drill yards, scanning for signs of treachery. Friendships cooled into wary tolerance. Creed saw it in their eyes. Trust was fraying. And when trust frayed, command collapsed. An unexpected visitor arrived at dawn. Inquisitor Valeria of the Ordo Hereticus. She cut a stark figure against the snow, her black coat trailing over the frost, her gaze sharp as a power blade. "Your fortress is compromised," she said without greeting. "I will find the rot, but you will give me full access to your command structure." Creed did not like her tone, but he liked the truth in her words even less. "You'll have cooperation," he said. But understand this, Inquisitor. Cadia is not your pawn. If you start tearing apart my chain of command without cause, you'll do the enemy's work for them." She said nothing, only studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his soul, then turned away. That night, Creed was alone in the war room when the pylon hum wavered. The green light flickered across the snowfields. The eye of terror boiled in the sky, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw the silhouette of a figure standing in the warp storm, watching him. The data slates on the table chimed. 3 incoming orders. All bore his authorization codes. All ordered the withdrawal of Cadian regiments from the southern approach, leaving a swathe of the planet's surface exposed. Creed's blood ran cold. He had given no such orders. When he checked the origin point, it was not an enemy signal. It came from inside Casa Partox, from the personal quarters of his most trusted aide. By morning, that aide would be in chains. And by nightfall, Creed would realize the betrayal was deeper than any single traitor. The infection was in the system itself. The void beyond terror burned. Great war fleets, once proud brothers in arms, now faced each other as enemies, their banners of loyalty and treachery flickering in the light of dying stars. The War Master's armada, a black tide of hatred, had reached the cradle of humanity. The long shadow of Horus loomed over the throne world, his war engines blotting out constellations. For 7 long years the Horus heresy had torn the Imperium apart. Now, all paths converged upon Saul. The Emperor's defenders, an alliance of loyalist legions, the Adeptus Custodes, Imperial fists, and the shattered remnants of the Imperial army gathered for the final stand. None doubted this would be the most terrible battle in human history. Upon the battlements of the Imperial Palace, Rogel Dawn stood, a fortress made flesh. His golden armor gleamed under the pallid light of Terra's dying sun. His eyes swept across the labyrinthine fortifications, each one constructed under his personal direction. Every wall, every gun emplacement, every killing field had been calculated to perfection. Yet he knew perfection alone would not stop Horus. In the orbit above, the void was already aflame. Massive warships, some kilometers in length, exchange fire in ranges that span thousands of kilometers. Macro cannon shells the size of cathedrals tore through void shields, while lance beams cut through hulls like molten spears. Loyalist fleets, outnumbered and outgunned, fought with grim desperation, holding back the traitor vanguard long enough for the palace defenses to prepare. On the front lines, the Imperial fists and blood angels stood shoulder to shoulder. Sanguinius, angelic yet sorrowful, knew his role in the defense was both a shield and a prophecy. Whispers of his doom had followed him since Davin, and now, in the heart of the final war, he felt their weight heavier than ever. "Brother," Sanguinius said softly to Dawn as they surveyed the killing fields, "this place will be remembered long after our bones turn to dust. But memory is no comfort to the dead." Dawn's reply was as cold as iron. "We are not here for comfort. We are here to buy the Emperor time. If that means we die on these walls, so be it." The first bombardment struck terror like the wrath of gods. Planetary shields shimmered under the onslaught, but each hit strained the network further. Entire hab blocks collapsed in the lower hive levels from seismic shockwaves alone. In the skies, drop pods and assault craft began their deadly descent, streaking like meteors. The traitor legions descended in fury. Sons of Horus, World Eaters, Death Guard, and Emperor's children. Once the pride of the Great Crusade, now came as executioners. Mortarian's fleets unleashed virulent toxins into the atmosphere, turning whole districts into choking, pestilent graveyards. The World Eaters charged headlong into the outer bastions, their chain axes roaring like hungry predators. Every meter of ground was paid for in oceans of blood. Bolter fire hammered against advancing traitors. Artillery reduced entire assault waves to red mist, and still they came. For 3 days and nights without pause, the outer walls were contested in brutal combat. In the catacombs below the palace, the Adeptus Custodes guarded the inner sanctum. They knew their role was to be the Emperor's last shield. None spoke of retreat. To them, such words did not exist. Yet the greatest threat was still above. Horus himself remained aboard his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, watching the battle unfold. He sought to draw the Emperor out, to force a final confrontation. And as the days bled into weeks, that moment drew ever closer. By the second week of the siege, the outer curtain walls were breached. The enemy poured through, forcing the defenders to fall back to the Eternity Wall spaceport. Dawn ordered the fortifications there to be held at any cost, for if the traitors took the spaceport, they could land Titans and super-heavy armor directly into the palace grounds. It was here that the Blood Angels shone brightest. Sanguinius himself led counterattacks that hurled the enemy back, his wings a banner of hope amid the carnage. The World Eaters met him in savage melee, yet none could match the Primarch's speed and grace. He slew champions by the dozen, even as the dead piled high around him. Still, even an angel could not fight forever. Each victory was temporary. Each pushback met with renewed traitor assault. The air stank of promethium, blood, and rot. The sun, hidden behind the thick pall of war smoke, was reduced to a faint, dying glow. In the Strategium, Dawn and Sanguinius met for what would be one of their last councils together. Horus will break through eventually, Dawn admitted, his voice like stone grinding against stone. The only question is where and when. Sanguinius looked toward the walls, where the sound of bolter fire never ceased. Then we must make him bleed for every step, and when the walls fall, we will be the ones waiting. The siege would continue for weeks more, but by its end, Terra would never be the same. The world was becoming a graveyard, the palace a tomb in the making. And high above, aboard the Vengeful Spirit, the War Master waited for his brother, certain that their fates would be decided. The fortress of Alderuk had always been a place of awe, a sprawling citadel carved from the living rock of Caliban's Black Mountains. Its walls bore the scars of ancient sieges, its halls the echo of victories won by sword and faith. But in those later days, beneath the banners of the Emperor's heraldry, the air within had grown cold with distrust. Luther walked the high parapets alone. His eyes swept across the forest below, dark and endless, where the creatures of old Caliban once roamed free. Now they were hunted to near extinction, their skulls mounted as trophies by the Imperium's agents. To Luther, it was not victory, but erasure. The slow, deliberate smothering of Caliban's identity beneath the weight of Terra's rule. Behind him, footsteps sounded. Zahariel approached, his expression carefully measured. "You called for me, my lord," the young knight said, his voice low. "I did," Luther replied, not turning. "Tell me, when you dream, do you still see them?" Zahariel's gaze hardened. The beasts? Number something worse. A shadow, vast and formless. It watches. Luther's lips tightened. Then you see it too. In truth, the shadow had haunted Luther's mind for months. It whispered in the quiet moments, questioning his loyalty, reminding him of every slight from the lion, every order from distant terror that cut deeper than any blade. It told him that Caliban was not free, that the lion had chained it willingly to the Emperor's leash. That evening, in the fortress's great hall, Luther convened a private gathering of his most trusted knights. The torches burned low, casting long, flickering shapes across the stone. The table between them bore maps of Caliban's surface, marked with imperial outposts, patrol routes, and ship landings. "They call this compliance," Luther began, his voice calm but heavy with restrained anger. "They say Caliban is part of a glorious imperium. But look closer. Our forests are burned, our people taxed, our knights reduced to garrison duty. And where is the lion? At the Emperor's side, waging war across the stars. His heart no longer belongs to this world." A murmur passed through the gathered knights. Some shifted uneasily. Others met Luther's words with grim nods. Master Ramiel leaned forward. "You speak of change, dangerous change. Do you mean to oppose the lion himself?" Luther's eyes flashed. "I mean to remind him of what he has forgotten. Caliban belongs to us. We bled for it, fought for it, and we will not see it become another nameless, compliant world in the Emperor's ledger." In the weeks that followed, whispers spread through Uldaruk. Servants spoke of closed-door councils, of knights departing under cover of darkness to inspect remote garrisons. Messages came and went in cipher. Supplies were diverted, not enough to draw imperial suspicion, but enough to stock hidden caches deep in the forests. Yet not all were convinced. Brother Astellan, one of the lion's most loyal warriors, confronted Luther in the training yard. The clang of sparring blades rang around them, but their voices were low and sharp. "This path you tread," Astellan warned, "it leads to ruin. The lion's trust is not something to be gambled with. Defy him, and you defy the Emperor himself." Luther stepped close, his tone edged like a drawn sword. "And if the Emperor's will is to strip Caliban of its soul, should we kneel and thank him for it?" Astellan's jaw tightened, but he said no more. He turned away, yet Luther knew the man would watch him closely from now on. One storm-lashed night, Zahariel came to Luther with news that would harden his resolve. "My lord," he said, "an edict has come from Terra. All remaining knightly orders of Caliban are to be disbanded and folded into the wider legion. Their names, their heraldry, erased." Luther's fist clenched until the leather of his gloves creaked. This was no longer about honor or pride. It was about survival. The Imperium would not rest until every trace of Caliban's independence was gone. He looked to Zahariel, and for the first time in years, there was no hesitation in his voice. "Then we will act, quietly at first, but we will act." In the dark, beneath Alderuk, in vaults older than the fortress itself, Luther gathered his chosen. Their oaths were spoken not in the Emperor's tongue, but in the old language of Caliban, a language the Imperium had forbidden. Each knight swore upon sword and blood to stand with Luther against all threats, even if those threats wore the armor of their brothers. Above them, the storm raged, and the shadow in Luther's mind seemed to stir, as if pleased. For in the fortress of Alderuk, the seeds of rebellion had been sown, and they would take root in blood. The halls of the angel's palace blazed with gold and red, as if the stones themselves had been bled dry and forged anew. Sanguinius had decreed the celebration a night of triumph, a feast to mark the conclusion of the decade-long campaign against the Pale Serpent Legion. Courtiers, warriors, and envoys from across the sector attended, their silks and armours glimmering beneath 1,000 suspended lanterns. The great hall was a cathedral to victory. Statues of angelic warriors loomed over the assembled guests, their stone wings spread wide in eternal vigilance. The air was thick with incense and the fragrance of roasted meats, but beneath it lingered the metallic tang of blood, a reminder of the price paid for conquest. Sanguinius, seated upon his throne of marble and gold, wore no crown. He needed none. His very presence was a coronation. His golden hair caught the light like threads of fire, his white wings arched behind him in quiet majesty. Yet, for all the splendor of the moment, there was a shadow in his eyes. It was not a shadow born of fatigue, though the war had taken its toll. It was something deeper, the echo of words spoken in secret chambers, promises whispered by unseen voices. For weeks now, he had felt a strange pull, as if the universe itself sought to lead him toward a truth too vast and terrible to be contained. As the feast began, the first of the blood angels entered bearing trays of wine so dark it seemed distilled from night itself. Toasts were raised in Sanguinius's name, yet he drank sparingly, his gaze wandering from guest to guest. Among the throng, he saw allies and rivals alike. General Seradane of the outer colonies, who owed her loyalty more to fear than to love. Lord Malkar, whose gifts were always too generous and whose eyes always too calculating. And at the far end, half hidden in shadow, a figure cloaked in crimson, who seemed to watch him with an intensity no other dared. He would come to know this stranger before the night's end. As the musicians struck their first chords, dancers wove between the tables, their silken sleeves trailing like ribbons of flame. The laughter of nobles filled the air, yet Sanguinius heard it as though from a great distance. His mind was elsewhere, on the vision that had haunted him the night before, a black sun rising over his empire, casting every victory into ash. When the banquet reached its height, the cloaked figure rose. No one saw him approach until he stood directly before the throne. Conversations faltered, and a hush spread like ripples in still water. The figure drew back his hood to reveal a face both ageless and ancient, the skin pale as bone, the eyes glimmering with the sheen of blood. "Angel of blood," the stranger said, his voice carrying through the hall without need of volume. "Your victories have been many, but they are not yet enough. The pale serpent is dead, yet the shadow he serves still coils about the stars. You dine in celebration while your true enemy sharpens his blade." Murmurs erupted. Some called for the guards, but Sanguinius raised a hand, silencing them. "Who are you to speak such words in my hall?" "I am the messenger you have tried not to hear," the man replied. "I bring not flattery but truth, and the truth is this. The war you believe ended tonight is but the prologue to a far greater ruin. Even now your enemies gather, and the roots of betrayal grow within your own soil." Gasps and accusations flew among the guests. Eyes turned toward suspected rivals. Old grudges flared. Yet the stranger did not flinch. He leaned forward, speaking only for Sanguinius now. "When the black sun rises, will you bow to it, or will you break it? That choice will come sooner than you think." And just as suddenly as he had appeared, the man stepped back, his cloak billowing like a curtain of blood, and was gone. No door opened, no shadow betrayed him. The rest of the banquet continued in a strained mockery of celebration, but the angel of blood tasted nothing, heard nothing, felt nothing, save the weight of those words. The crimson wine in his goblet now looked darker than night. "D not by walls or armies," but by a single duel that would end an age. The war-torn plains of Mars groaned beneath the grinding tread of the god machines. Their silhouettes, vast, angular, and terrible, stalked the horizon like predators forged of iron and flame. The sky was a molten red, shrouded with storms of ash and electrostatic discharge. Lightning danced between the jagged towers of the forges, as if the planet itself sensed that something unnatural was taking root in its heart. Princeps Cadia of the Magnis Invicta stood in the control sanctum, hands locked into the neural manacles. His mind burned with the machine spirit's visions, chaotic, fragmented, and violent. The Titan's thoughts had grown. Strange of late, not the usual hunger for war, or the righteous fury that came with the machine god's blessing. No, this was something darker, whispering in binary syllables that had no place in the Mechanicum's lexicon. Cadia dared not report the change to his Magos superiors. The Legio Victorum was stretched thin, locked in a grinding war with the Skitari legions of Forge Polis Dvornik. To speak of a corrupted machine spirit would invite suspicion, disgrace, or worse, the ritual dismantling of his Titan. He could not allow that. Magnis Invicta was more than his weapon. It was his soul, his legacy, his eternal companion. And yet, the voice in the machine was growing louder. Far to the east, the loyalist forged cities were fortifying against rumors of treachery within the Legio. Their augur arrays recorded unusual Titan movement patterns, formations breaking apart without orders, war engines disappearing into the dead zones between hive spires. Magos Dominus Athemas suspected sabotage, but the truth was more insidious. In the deepest manufactoria vaults of Forge Redoubt Theta 9, Archmagos Beltharion stood before a colossus swathed in shadow. This was no sanctioned god machine. Its frame was warped beyond the standard patterns of Mars, adorned with sigils not found in any Mechanicum archive. Its armor shimmered with an oily, wrong light. This was Octoritas Maledictum, a Titan born not from the will of the Omnisire, but from forbidden schemata whispered in the dreams of heretics. Beltharion's voice was soft, reverent, and utterly blasphemous. Soon you will walk, my child. Soon the false order will burn. The first clash came in the dust wastes outside the ruined data cathedral of Arc Prime. 3 loyalist Reaver Titans of Legio Victorum met a lance of unknown pattern war machines. At first, the loyalists thought them lost brothers returned. Then the Vox burst with garbled screams as the impostors opened fire, not with blessed plasma or volkite, but with weapons that spat arcs of green-black lightning, tearing through void shields like parchment. Cadia, watching from Magnis Invicta's perch miles away, felt the machine spirit stir in agitation. It wanted to move, wanted to join the others. For the first time he hesitated in battle. "Princeps," shouted Moderati Jalen. "Orders." Caida's lips trembled. We wait." His Titan disagreed. For 3 nights after, Cadia dreamed of strange worlds. Vast plains of metal where Titans walked like gods, their shadows falling across burning suns. He felt the pull of it, as if something beyond the veil of reality was calling his name in a language he could almost understand. By the 4th night, he stopped trying to resist. The Mechanicum's response was swift but fractured. Some Forge worlds demanded immediate excommunication of the rogue engines. Others urged caution, claiming the sightings were misinterpretations of battlefield data. Athemas knew better. His auguries had captured a single frame of footage, one of the heretic Titans tearing apart a warlord with its bare hands, no weaponry at all, as though it were feeding on the machine spirit's death cry. He brought the evidence before the fabricator general. The old man's response was chilling. "This matter is not for open discourse. You will hold your tongue." That was when Athemus realized the corruption ran higher than he thought. The war intensified. Skitarii legions clashed in the smog-choked alleys of the forge hives. Loyalist titans began to vanish mid-battle, their machine spirits overwhelmed by strange frequencies transmitted through the noosphere. Some reappeared days later, different, their heraldry scorched away, their plasma cores burning with a baleful hue. They marched now under the banner of the Iron Horizon, a name not spoken openly yet feared in every Vox channel. Caedor's Magnis Invicta was among them. When he next strode into battle, he did so against his former brothers. The battlefield was a graveyard of broken mechs and shattered steel, the air heavy with ionized dust. Through the neural link, Caedor no longer felt fear or hesitation. The voice in the machine had become his own, and together they moved with inhuman precision. The loyalist Riva Ferrum Gloria stood before him, its banners tattered but defiant. Caedor remembered its princeps, Talaris, once his comrade. For a moment, there was recognition in the Vox silence between them. Then Magnis Invicta fired, and the Ferrum Gloria fell. By campaign's end, the Iron Horizon controlled nearly a third of Mars' surface. The Mechanicum's high command had sealed the records, declaring the events classified under the highest sanctum codes. But the truth remained in the minds of those who survived, that somewhere beyond the forges, beyond even the red sands, there was a place where the god machines whispered to each other in languages older than the Imperium. And they were not Loi. The planet of Sicarius Prime burned for 3 days before the first sermons were spoken. It was a shrine world of the imperial creed, a jewel in the ecclesiarchy's crown, its surface covered in great basilicas, cathedral cities, and mile-high statues of the emperor. It was also a world that had defied Lorgar's summons. When the 17th Legion came, it was not as liberators, but as fire and judgment. From orbit, the word-bearers rained down bombardments with clinical precision, not to destroy outright, but to wound the world deeply enough to bring its leaders crawling to the negotiating table. Lorgar had not yet abandoned the pretense of conversion. He wished to show the Imperium that his truth was unbreakable. Corferan, however, saw no use in half measures. "Let the stones themselves weep, and the people will kneel," he had whispered to the Primarch. Lorgar had not answered, but his silence was taken as permission. The cities burned in patterns, forming symbols that could only be seen from the upper atmosphere, sigils older than humanity's recorded history. Even the astropaths stationed on the orbital fleet shivered when they looked upon them. The first sermons, when the smoke cleared, Lorgar descended in his golden warplate, accompanied by the serrated sun, his most zealous host. They came not to rebuild, but to preach. The fire sermons began at the steps of the Basilica of the Sword, its spire cracked by orbital fire, yet still standing as if in defiance. The citizens gathered, not from loyalty, but because there was nowhere else to go. Their leaders had been executed, their PDFs scattered. Hunger and grief had softened their will. Lorgar's voice carried over the crowd, a deep, resonant echo amplified by vox thuribles carried by his acolytes. You believed yourselves holy in the sight of the Emperor. You believed your prayers reached him, but your God has never heard you. I will teach you a faith that bleeds, a truth that answers. His words were careful, almost tender, as if spoken to a wounded child. And yet, every sentence was a nail hammered into the coffin of imperial orthodoxy. Around him, the word-bearers echoed the sermons, spreading through the ruins, speaking to small gatherings in hushed tones. Some resisted. Some spat in the face of their would-be saviors. For these, there was only one answer: burning stakes, public executions, and chanting that drowned out their screams. The fire sermons were not mere words. They were the reshaping of belief through both persuasion and terror. Seeds of the New Faith. On the third night, Lorgar performed the rite of the Crimson Sky. 1,000 prisoners were brought forth, chosen for their status as priests and enforcers of the imperial creed. Before the assembled crowd, they were sacrificed in a slow, ritualistic manner, their blood drained into great bronze bowls etched with runes. When the final heart stopped beating, the blood was thrown high into the air, and the wind seemed to carry it across the burning skyline, turning the clouds red. The people gasped, for in that moment the sky answered. Lightning without storm split the horizon, and shapes, not human, moved in the upper heavens. Some swore they saw wings, others saw claws. All felt a pressure on their minds, a presence watching. Lorgar spread his arms, bathed in the crimson rain. "Behold," he said, "the truth that was denied to you, the truth that answers." From that day, Sicarius Prime no longer prayed to the emperor. Its cathedrals were defiled and remade as temples to the pantheon. The great statue of the emperor was toppled, and in its place rose a shifting, multi-faced idol whose features changed depending on the viewer's thoughts. The world's fall was complete, but Lorgar's heart was heavy. He had seen the signs in the lightning too, and though he did not speak it aloud, he knew the powers he served were not the saviors he claimed them to be. But faith, once kindled, is not easily extinguished, least of all in the heart of a God's chosen. Al to any throne. The skies above Zerath Prime bled red as the Forge world groaned under the strain of battle. Smoke belched from the manufacturer's spires, and the once ordered clang of industry had been replaced by the deafening roar of war. The loyalist forces, already fractured and desperate, fought in the shadow of the enemy's greatest triumph. The awakening of the heretical god machine Vox Tenebris. Magos Dominus Calvrix stood upon the battlements of the central manufactorum, his robes heavy with ash and oil. His voice, usually cold and precise, now trembled with something dangerously close to fear. Through the haze, the silhouette of the traitor Titan loomed, its form warped and blackened by the machine spirits it had enslaved. Crimson light bled from its core reactor like an open wound in reality, each step it took sending tremors through the very foundations of the city. The loyalist Titan Invictus Rex, a warlord-class engine of the Legio Metallica, moved to intercept. Its carapace weapons spat incandescent lances of plasma, scorching the heretic's armor, but Vox Tenebris barely slowed. Its corrupted void shield shimmered with sickly green energy, absorbing the barrage like rain on a roof. "Target its knee joints," Calvrix barked into the Vox. "Force it to falter before it reaches the central reactor." But the orders came too late. Vox Tenebris unleashed its primary weapon, the Oblivion Lance, a beam of concentrated empiric energy that tore through the void shields of Invictus Rex and cored its torso in a single apocalyptic strike. The loyalist Titan collapsed, its fall crushing entire hab blocks and sending shockwaves through the battlefield. Panic spread among the defenders. Skitari, Legions fought with mechanical precision, but the morale of mortal soldiers shattered as they watched their guardian engine die. Above, Mechanicus air wings screamed through the clouds, attempting bombing runs on the corrupted god machine, only to be swatted from the skies by its anti-air batteries. In the command sanctum, Archmagos Prime Veritas oversaw the battle through hololithic projections. The Loyalist cause was collapsing faster than even his pessimistic calculations had predicted. He turned to Calvrix, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Seal the reactor vaults. The enemy must not claim the heart of Zerath Prime." Calvrix hesitated. "To do so will doom the outer sectors. Millions will—" "Be sacrificed," Veritas interrupted. "Yes, as will we all. That is the will of the Omnissiah." The order was given. Deep beneath the surface, massive blast doors groaned shut, sealing away the reactor cores and their priceless STC archives. The traitors would not have them, but neither would the Loyalists ever access them again. It was a final act of denial, one that condemned the Forge world's outer districts to die. The heretic forces pressed forward, now backed by the blasphemous war psalms of their corrupted tech priests. Over the Vox, distorted voices chanted in binary cant, praising the Dark Mechanicum and the new Omnissiah that promised them freedom from the shackles of the Imperium. By nightfall, the outer sectors were gone. The Manufactoria towers were burning husks, their skeletal frames silhouetted by the fires of war. The remaining Skitari fought in close-quarter corridors, their galvanic rifles replaced by arc blades and servo-axes as ammunition ran dry. Calvrix found himself in the ruins of the central data spire, desperately purging machine spirits before the enemy could corrupt them. One by one, the ancient cogitators went dark, their centuries of knowledge lost in bursts of static and flame. Each purge was a wound to his soul, but he knew the alternative. Letting the traitors twist those spirits into weapons would be worse. In the final hours, Vox Tenebris reached the inner sanctum. Its massive footfalls cracked ferrocrete streets as it advanced toward the sealed reactor vaults. Loyalist artillery batteries pounded it relentlessly, their firepower stripping away its void shields. But the heretic Titan's armor was too thick. The last stand was fought not by Titans, but by men and machines of flesh and steel. Calvrix led a company of Cataphron destroyers in a suicidal assault, their plasma culverins glowing white-hot as they poured everything into the war engine's leg armor. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed the Titan might fall, its left knee buckling under the assault. But the machine's corrupted spirit roared with unnatural fury. It retaliated with a quake cannon blast that erased the Loyalists in a single act of annihilation. When the sun rose, Zerath Prime was no longer a Forge world. It was a graveyard. The air shimmered with heat from the smouldering ruins, and the once proud spires lay broken and blackened. The enemy had taken the Manufactoria, the data archives, and the souls of countless machine spirits. Only the sealed reactor vaults remained untouched. For now. High above in orbit, Veritas watched the devastation from the bridge of his retreating cruiser. His face betrayed no emotion, but his mechadendrites coiled and uncoiled in restless patterns. He had not saved his world. He had not even slowed its death. But he had denied the enemy one final prize, and in that, perhaps, there was a fragment of victory. Far below, in the ashes of the forge, Vox Tenebris raised its head and bellowed in a voice of steel and warp fire. The war for Zerath Prime was over, but the war for the Mechanicus had only begun. The war in the skies above Mars had reached a fever pitch. The loyalist titans of the Collegia Titanica battled the corrupted god engines of the heretic Legios in a storm of plasma and steel. Lightning flashed across the planet's rust-red horizon as weapons of unimaginable power clashed, each strike shaking the crust of the ancient world. Deep beneath the surface, in the labyrinthine catacombs of the Noctis Labyrinthus, Magos Dominus Rylane descended into the forbidden vaults. Around her, the air shimmered with static discharge as ancient security protocols, automated since the Dark Age, came online. The corridors were choked with dust, their walls inscribed with sigils that predated the Imperium itself. The voice of the machine spirit within her cranial implants whispered warnings. "You should not be here. This place is sealed by the Omnissiah's decree." But Rylane ignored it. She had been given the coordinates by Archmagos Corval, the leader of the rebellion on Mars, who had promised her the greatest prize of all, the awakening of a god machine from before the Great Crusade, one that could shatter the loyalist resistance in a single strike. Her tech priests labored to bypass the gates. Colossal adamantium doors etched with runes of binding. Each one was a seal against something vast and terrible. As their cutting torches hissed and their mechadendrites scraped at the locks, she could feel the vault tremble. Then the final seal broke. A deep vibration rolled through the floor, as though the vault itself was breathing for the first time in millennia. The doors groaned and began to part, revealing a vast chamber beyond. Inside was the Eternus, the Titan whose name had been struck from all records. Even dormant, its sheer scale made the air heavy. Its armor was blackened and scarred, its carapace bristling with weapons unlike any seen in the Imperium. But it was its faceplate, shaped like a fanged skull, that made Rylane's organic heart skip a beat. Her attendants began the rites of awakening, chanting Binharic hymns while data streams poured into the Titan's machine core. Sparks flew and a cold wind seemed to emanate from the war engine itself. But something was wrong. The Eternus did not answer the call of the Omnissiah. Instead, a voice like 1,000 grinding gears filled the chamber. "At last, I am unbound." The chamber's lights flared crimson. Control panels exploded in showers of sparks. One by one, the tech priests collapsed, their minds overloaded by raw machine malice. Rylane staggered back, realizing too late that this was no loyal god machine. It was one of the abominations from the forbidden Dark Mechanicum, bound in ages past to prevent it from consuming the world. The Titan began to move, each step shaking the vault like an earthquake. Chains as thick as starship hull plating snapped and fell away. Its eyes blazed with warp fire, and from its carapace weapon mounts came a low, hungry hum. On the surface, the battle halted for a heartbeat as a new tremor shook the planet. Loyalist and traitor, Titans alike turned their heads toward the plains of the Noctis Labyrinthus. The ground split open in a canyon of molten stone, and from it rose the Eternus, its weapons unfolding like the petals of some monstrous iron flower. The loyalist Prynips commander over the Vox whispered only one word: "God Engine." Then the Eternus fired. Its opening salvo vaporized a warlord Titan in a single blinding blast. The air rippled with the force of it, and the shockwave flattened entire battalions. Panic swept the loyalist forces. Even the corrupted heretic legios hesitated, for the Eternus did not distinguish between ally and enemy. Its machine spirit was one of pure annihilation. Rylane, watching from the shattered vault entrance, realized the truth. Corval had lied. This was not a weapon to win the war. It was a weapon to end everything. Above, mother skies above Baal Secundus were blood-red at dawn. A storm brewed on the horizon, its dust-choked winds carrying the bitter scent of ash and ozone. Sanguinius stood upon the high parapets of the fortress monastery, his golden hair streaming behind him, his wings spread wide to drink in the cold air. He was silent, watching the world below, yet seeing far beyond it. The fleet from Terra had arrived 2 days earlier, carrying grim news. Horus Lupercal, once the most trusted of the Emperor's sons, had turned against the Imperium. It was treachery on a scale that defied belief, a wound to the soul of the galaxy itself. But for Sanguinius, the wound was personal. Horus had been his friend, his brother, his confidant in the lonely burdens of command. Now he was the architect of an apocalypse. The blood angels prepared for war. Servitors moved in precise lines, loading munitions onto thunderhawks. Tech Marines blessed each weapon with solemn rites. In the great training halls, warriors drilled without pause, their faces hard with resolve. There was no room for doubt. They would follow their Primarch wherever he led. And yet, doubt gnawed at Sanguinius himself. He had foreseen his own death in visions, bloody, inevitable, and at the hands of Horus himself. The memory of the dream was like a thorn in his mind, piercing every thought. He knew he could not change what was coming, only meet it with dignity. On the third night after the fleet's arrival, he called his captains to council. The chamber was lit by the soft glow of lumens, shadows stretching long across the stone. Ascaelon, captain of the Sanguinary Guard, stood at his right hand, his ornate armor gleaming in the dim light. Ralderon, first captain of the Blood Angels, leaned over the hololithic display, his jaw tight. "The Emperor commands us to muster with the Loyalist forces," Ralderon said, his voice steady but urgent. "Horus gathers his fleet in the Istvan system. The Loyalist legions already moved to intercept." "And what of Terra?" asked another captain. "If Horus turns his gaze there, the throne world will burn before we can return." Sanguinius raised a hand, silencing the debate. "We cannot be everywhere at once. The Emperor trusts us to strike where our blades will cut deepest. That is where we will go." But as the council spoke of deployments and strategies, Sanguinius's gaze wandered. He was remembering the warmth of Horus's laughter, the fierce loyalty that once burned in the War Master's eyes. How had it come to this? The answer was bitter. Pride, ambition, and the whispering corruption of the warp. That night, alone in his chambers, Sanguinius stood before the great viewing port. The stars shone cold and distant, each a reminder of the vastness of the Imperium he was sworn to defend. He thought of Baal's red deserts, of the warriors who had bled for him, of the people who saw him as more than a warrior, as a savior. He knew what was at stake was not just the survival of worlds, but the soul of mankind itself. Ascaelon entered quietly. "My lord, the men are ready. They will follow you to the edge of the galaxy." "They may have to," Sanguinius replied. He turned to his captain with a faint smile, one touched with sorrow. "When the end comes, I would have them remember that we fought not for vengeance, but for hope." And so, under the crimson skies of Baal, the Blood Angels departed. Their fleet rose into the void like a storm of wings, the golden figure of their Primarch at its heart. Ahead lay Istvan, ahead lay Horus, ahead lay destiny. But already, in the depths of the warp, darker things stirred, watching, waiting, and hungering for the fall of the angel. Ours burned. The skies above Mars were torn by black storms, lightning crawling like veins of molten gold across the crimson horizon. The great forged cathedrals of Olympus Mons burned, their spires sheared away by the weapons of the very titans they had birthed. The Legio Mortis had come, not as defenders of the Mechanicum, but as executioners of their own kin. The civil war among the tech priests had reached its most savage crescendo, and the god machines strode through the wreckage with the solemn grace of executioners. At the heart of the devastation, the Omnissiah's wrath, the most revered warlord titan of the loyalist Legio Metallica, waded through the shattered remains of manufactorums and databanks, its void shields flickering under constant bombardment. Within its command throne, Princeps Archon Vey felt the machine spirit's pain as though it were his own. The Titan's voice was a whisper in the deep places of his mind. "We bleed, Princeps. Strike now, before the end takes us." Across the valley of shattered steel, the traitor Titan Iron Eidolon advanced, its silhouette a monstrous effigy of heresy, its banners now marked with the eye of Horus. Once, the two had fought side by side in 100 battles. Now, they faced each other as enemies. The Iron Eidolon's weapons glowed with the heat of destruction, its plasma annihilator spitting lances of sun-hot death across the battlefield. Arcans Moderati spoke in quick bursts of binary cant, updating range and shield integrity. The Loyalist Titan's reactor ran dangerously hot, its plasma reserves nearly depleted. But Archon refused to retreat. Mars itself was at stake, not the barren world of rock and dust, but the memory of what it had stood for before treachery took root. Through the storm, the Iron Eidolon's vox roared with a deep, synthetic voice. "Yield, Archon. The Omnissiah has abandoned you. The War Master's will is inevitable." Archon's reply was cold steel. "The Omnissiah needs no War Master, only loyalty." Then the two god machines collided in fire and fury. Each step they took cracked the ground, each blow shook the heavens. Plasma bolts tore through armor plating the size of hab blocks, and volcano cannon fire ripped gaping wounds in their titanic frames. The air was thick with molten metal and the screams of dying Skitarii below, their sacrifices little more than dust beneath the Titan's feet. Above them, orbital strikes lit the Martian night with the brilliance of a false dawn. The war had spread far beyond the Forge world. Titan battles now raged in the void, on moons, and across the red plains. But here, on the sands of the Noctis Labyrinth, the fate of two ancient machine spirits would decide the day. The Omnissiah's wrath was bleeding power. Warning runes flashed red in Archon's mind, each one a herald of death. But the Titan spirit whispered again, "I am not done. Give me my enemy's heart." Archon bared his teeth and overrode the safety protocols. The plasma annihilator charged past safe thresholds, its core screaming with energy drawn from the very edge of catastrophic overload. The Iron Eidolon fired, shattering the Wrath's right shoulder plating. But Archon did not slow. With a roar like a god in torment, the Omnissiah's wrath fired its annihilator point blank. The traitor Titan's left flank detonated, molten armor cascading like waterfalls of fire. The Iron Eidolon staggered, its head assembly sparking with blue arcs as its princeps screamed in rage and agony. They struck each other one last time, a killing embrace of steel giants. The battlefield was drowned in the light of twin reactor breaches. The explosion carved a new crater into the Martian surface, a wound that would never truly heal. When the dust settled, only twisted wreckage remained. The Omnissiah's wrath lay broken, its command throne silent. The Iron Eidolon was a smouldering ruin, its banners burned away. Neither victor nor vanquished would rise again. High above, the war still raged, but those who bore witness to the duel would speak of it for centuries. It was said the spirits of the two god machines lingered on the wind, locked forever in their battle, refusing to yield even in death. And in that moment, Mars herself seemed to mourn, not for victory or defeat, but for the brotherhood that had been lost. The bells of the imperial palace rang only on moments of the gravest import, on the day the emperor strode forth to conquer the stars, on the day of his return to Terra, and in the black hour of Horus's treachery. Now, in the shadowed depths of the 41st millennium, the bell of lost souls stirred again. The sound did not come in peals, but in a single, long toll, deep, resonant, and unnatural. It seemed to echo not only in the air, but in the minds of all who dwelled upon Terra. Citizens froze in the streets, adepts faltered in their prayers, and the custodians themselves turned their golden helms toward the sound, as if expecting the sky to split. To the adepts of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, the psychic resonance was unbearable. One by one, astropaths fell to their knees, blood weeping from their eyes, whispering the same words again and again. The angel weeps. The angel weeps. The angel comes. Beneath the palace, in the catacombs where only the Sigillite's successors dared walk, Lord Malkador's throne lay empty, but its wards still pulsed faintly with power. Down there, in a chamber older than the Imperium itself, the bell of lost souls hung chained in stasis fields, but tonight the chains trembled. On the surface, Terra was already in chaos. The High Lords had been summoned into emergency convocation. In the Sanctum Imperialis, the 12 most powerful mortals in the galaxy gathered, each speaking over the other, their voices thick with fear. Lord Guilliman's return decades earlier had given the Imperium a breath of hope, but this was something else. The Fabricator General of Mars spoke first, Vox Grill rasping like rusted iron. The bell rings for one of the Emperor's own. This is no mere omen. This is summoning. The Ecclesiarch, a gaunt man with fire in his eyes, struck the table with his staff. You speak blasphemy. The Emperor needs no summons. This is witchery, Xenos work. Seal the palace and scour the hives. Guilliman's hollow image flickered into being above the council table. His expression was a mask, unreadable. It is neither blasphemy nor witchcraft. It is prophecy. I have heard those words before. The angel weeps. They were carved into the walls of Monarchia in Lorgar's hand, long before the heresy. The chamber fell silent. Even the Ecclesiarch dared not speak. Far away, beyond the edge of the Sol system, a vessel unlike any in the Imperial fleet emerged from the warp. Its hull bore the crimson and gold heraldry of the 9th Legion, but its structure was wrong, sleeker, almost organic, as though it had been shaped rather than built. Its captain, a towering figure in ornate armor, stood upon the prow. His eyes glowed faintly, wings folded against his back like those of a great bird of prey. His face was too perfect, too sorrowful to be human. He whispered, not to his crew, but to the void itself. I am late. I am always late. In the catacombs of Terra, the bell's tolling grew stronger. Each strike was slower than the last, as though time itself resisted the sound. On the throne world streets, people fell to their knees. The Ministorum's priests shouted prayers, trying to mask their terror with devotion, but their voices shook. In the Black Library, far beyond the Materium, librarians paused in their endless reading. One murmured to another. A piece has moved on the board. One that should have been dust. By the time the High Lords emerged from their sealed chamber, the skies over Terra had changed. A red light, faint but unmistakable, burned in the upper atmosphere. Some thought it a comet. Others whispered it was a star, burning where no star had been before. Those who remembered the Great Crusade recognized it at once, the Angel Star. Deep in the palace, the Adeptus Custodes stood ready in formation. Their captain, Valerian, addressed them. "We are ordered to the Eternity Gate. No one passes but the Regent, the High Lords, or he for whom the bell tolls." He said nothing of fear, but each warrior's grip on his guardian spear tightened. The stranger's ship entered Terra's orbital cordon without resistance. The defense platforms, the fleets, the gun batteries, none fired. No command was given to let him through, yet every machine spirit recognized his transponder codes as kin. When the figure descended the landing ramp, his armor seemed to drink the light, gold filigree catching every gleam. His wings spread, not for display, but as if in relief. His eyes scanned the walls of the palace and the skies above, as though expecting both to collapse. Valerian stepped forward, spear lowered. "Name yourself." The figure smiled sadly. "I am the son who did not return, the brother who could not forgive, the angel who fell in silence. I am Sanguinius." The Custodes did not move, but something in the air shifted, an ancient recognition, deeper than oaths, older than the Imperium itself. In the Sanctum Imperialis, Guilliman stared into the holofeed. His face, so controlled, so unyielding, cracked for the first time in centuries. "Welcome home, brother," he whispered. And above them all, the bell of lost souls gave its final toll and fell silent. The Mechanicus strongholds burned with the fire of their own machines. Cities, once crowned by the spires of the Omnissiah, now lay gutted, their steel bones jutting into the ash-choked sky like the carcasses of titanic beasts. The war for the soul of Mars had reached its penultimate act, and the air was heavy not only with smoke, but with the oppressive stillness of a dying god. Fabricator General Kelbor Hal stood in the shattered observatory of the Magma Basilica, his augmetic eyes scanning the city below. Even here, at the edge of the forge, the roar of titans and the shriek of macro shells echoed faintly. He no longer saw the Mars of his birth, nor the Mars of the Omnissiah's promise, only a red corpse, bled dry by centuries of devotion to a god that now stood revealed as nothing more than a pretender. But Kelbor Hal was not a man to weep. He had aligned himself with the War Master's cause not for sentiment, but for logic. The machine god of terror, he believed, was a lie. The Dark Mechanicum offered truth, an unshackled union between machine and spirit, without the decrees of the Emperor or the blasphemous restraint of the cult Mechanicus's dogma. Yet even now, with victory so close, he felt the cold edge of doubt pressing against his logic. Across the wasteland of the noosphere, encrypted signals whispered like dying embers. Loyalist forces, battered and fragmented, had entrenched themselves within the great scriptorium. It was here that Magos Domina Siracina held the final archives of pre-imperial Mars, knowledge older than the Imperium, perhaps older than Terra's own recorded history. To Kelbor Hal's allies, these archives were relics to be plundered. To him, they were the foundation of his next empire. He dispatched Skitarii legions Theta 9 and Gamma Red to breach the scriptorium. The streets became killing fields, littered with the shattered remains of battle automata, their machine spirits wailing into the static. The loyalists fought with desperation, their cybernetic forms holding the lines long after flesh would have failed them. Siratina herself stood upon the highest balcony, her serpentine lower body coiled in coils of bronze and steel. Her voice, transmitted across all channels, was not one of fear, but of defiance. Kelbor Hal, you who sold the soul of Mars know this. There will be no victory for you. Even if you tear down every vault, even if you burn every scroll, the truth will outlast your heresy. Kelbor Hal's answer came not in words, but in action. He unleashed the Legio Mortis, the Death's Head Titans, into the fray. The ground trembled beneath their adamantine steps, and the Loyalists' redoubts crumbled before the combined might of plasma annihilators and apocalypse missile barrages. The great scriptorium's walls, built to withstand the storms of Mars for 10,000 years, split open like cracked glass. Yet as his forces surged inward, something unexpected occurred. A silence fell, not the silence of victory, but of absence. Vox channels went dead. Sensorium feeds returned nothing but static. Kelbor's Hall felt the unnatural stillness bleed into the noosphere, severing his connection to his own troops. Then, from the heart of the scriptorium, an ancient signal pulsed, a frequency older than the Mechanicus creed itself. The pulse was not imperial, nor of the warp. It was the voice of the Forge itself, a machine intellect so ancient and vast that it dwarfed any human concept of godhood. The Fabricator General recognized it instantly, for it was a presence spoken of only in forbidden schematics and heretical blueprints. The Dragon of Mars, the Void Serpent bound beneath the red sands since before mankind's first breath. Siracina had not fought merely to defend archives. She had fought to awaken this buried intelligence, and now it stirred. Kelbor Hall's logic screamed for caution. The dragon's mind was alien, unshackled from the binary litany of the Omnisire. To bind it was impossible, to control it, unthinkable. Yet he could not deny the temptation. In that vast machine intellect was the key to dominion, not merely over Mars, but over every Forge world in the galaxy. The sky tore open with green lightning as the dragon's voice cascaded through every machine spirit on the planet. Skitarii froze mid-charge, Titans halted mid-stride. For a heartbeat, Mars itself seemed to listen. Kelbor Hall reached out through the noosphere, seeking communion, and felt his mind brush against something vast, cold, and utterly indifferent. It was then that he understood. The dragon had no care for the war of men. It saw flesh and steel alike as raw materials for its own designs. In its eyes, the Mechanicus, the Imperium, even the dark gods were irrelevant. It was the prime machine, the first and final logic. Kelbor Hal withdrew, severing his link before it consumed him. The silence that followed was absolute. The dragon sank back into its slumber, its will satisfied, or perhaps merely uninterested. When the battle ended, the great scriptorium was gone, reduced to molten glass and smoking rubble. The archives were lost, either destroyed in the fighting or spirited away into some hidden vault. Siracina herself vanished, her body never recovered. Kelbor Hal's forces claimed the ruins, but it was a hollow victory. The war for Mars was nearly won, but the silence that followed haunted him more than any loyalist resistance. That night, Kelbor Hal stood upon the edge of the Noctis labyrinth, gazing down into the black fissures that hid the dragon's tomb. He wondered if, in awakening it even for a moment, he had condemned Mars to a fate far darker than the War Master's rebellion. In the cold binary of his thoughts, one truth remained undeniable. Some machines are not meant to be worshipped, nor even served. They are meant to be feared. And in the silence of the forge, fear was all that remained. The palace was burning, from the golden spires to the sacred cathedral halls. All was wreathed in fire and the reek of blood. The sky above Terra churned with the black smoke of orbital bombardments, the void alight with the dying flares of shattered fleets. Yet within the Master's throne room, there was only silence, a silence broken only by the steady, laboured breaths of the Emperor, seated upon his gilded seat, his eyes closed as though in deep meditation. Before him knelt Sanguinius, wings folded tight, his armour cracked and bleeding in 100 places. The Angel of Blood was barely standing, his every motion weighed down by exhaustion and the knowledge of what must be done. In his hands rested the remnants of his once perfect blade, its edge shattered in his duel with the arch-traitor Horus upon the bridge of the vengeful spirit. He had struck, he had bled, but he had not slain the War Master. "My lord," Sanguinius whispered, voice hoarse, "it is not over, but you must finish it." The Emperor did not reply at first. His gaze, when it finally opened, was weary but resolute. "You have done all that was asked of you, my son. You stood before him when none else could. Your sacrifice has brought me the moment I require." And yet, in that moment, Sanguinius hesitated. Not out of fear for himself. He had long since made peace with his death, but for his legion, for his sons, the blood angels, who even now fought in the ash-choked streets of the imperial palace, dying by the thousand to hold the line. He saw their faces, noble Raldaron, faithful Azkaelon, and countless others whose names would be lost in the long night to come. "My sons will suffer," Sanguinius murmured, his voice breaking. "They will bear the flaw forever." The Emperor's eyes softened with something like grief. "I know." No further words passed between them. The angel turned and strode from the throne room, his footsteps echoing against marble floors that would soon be stained red. Outside, the roar of the battle was deafening, the sound of titans collapsing, of lasfire and bolter shells, of the dying screams of humanity's defenders. Sanguinius did not go to seek safety. Instead, he took to the air one final time, his wings beating against the smoky wind as he rose above the shattered walls of the palace. From here, he could see Horus's flagship still hanging above Terra like a black omen, its weapons raining death upon the capital. The angel soared towards it, a white streak in the midst of darkness. No mortal saw the moment he boarded the vengeful spirit again, nor the final confrontation between him and the War Master. Legends would say he fought with the fury of all the angels of heaven, that he struck blows that could shatter mountains. Others whispered he foresaw his death and did not resist, for it was the only way to weaken Horus enough for the Emperor to prevail. What is certain is this: when the Emperor came to face the War Master, Horus was wounded, and Sanguinius lay broken at his feet. The Emperor's wrath in that final duel would burn into history as the greatest act of divine fury the galaxy had ever known. Horus fell, slain by the master of mankind. But the cost was unbearable. The Emperor mortally wounded, bound forever to the Golden Throne, and the Imperium condemned to an eternity of war. When the battle was done, and the surviving loyalists gathered amidst the ruin, they found the angel's body. Azkaelon, weeping openly, bore his Primarch's corpse from the palace. The blood angels, hardened warriors all, knelt in silence, their grief deeper than words. The body of Sanguinius was placed within a stasis field in Baal's grandest shrine, where it remains to this day. His sons still bear his flaw, the black rage, a madness born of their psychic link to his death. But they fight on, driven by his memory and the hope that one day they will join him in the Emperor's light. And so ends the tale of Sanguinius, the angel of blood, beloved son, peerless warrior, martyr of the Imperium. His wings, once a symbol of hope, are now a reminder of the price paid for humanity's survival. In the annals of the Adeptus Astartes, it is written, "He died so that mankind might live. We fight so that his sacrifice shall not be in vain."